Welcome back to Behind the Educator's Lens, the podcast where we dive into the stories, perspectives, and practices of inspiring educators around the world. I'm your host, Robin Young, and today we're going to take a trip across the globe, virtually, of course, to Hong Kong. Our guest today is Kyle Wagner. Kyle is the founder of Transform Educational Consulting. He's a school designer, a learning coach, and the author of The Power of Simple. Kyle has spent more than a decade working with schools worldwide to create innovative project-based learning environments. Right now, he's based in Hong Kong, where he helps schools reimagine education and prepare students for the future. Kyle, I'm so excited to have you here on the show. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Nice to be here.
Before we dive into the big questions, let's loosen up with a quick game of this or that. I will give you two choices and you get to pick one. You can explain your answer or just let it speak for yourself. Ready? Coffee or tea?
Coffee,
City living or countryside?
countryside,
Morning person or night owl?
morning, 100%.
I think I know the answer to this one, but project-based learning or traditional lecture?
I would hope I'd say project-based learning.
Books or podcasts?
Ooh, podcast.
Favorite decade, 90s or 2000s?
Ooh, I would have said 80s, but out of those two, maybe 90s.
Ah, absolutely. 80s was the best. And my last question on my podcast, it's a bit of a personal question, but Star Wars or Star Trek?
My dad would kill me if he heard my answer to this question, so we might have to, not share this with my dad, but I'd say Star Wars. My dad's a huge Trekkie.
Yes, well, you scored a point for my team, so I appreciate you. We can be friends.
Okay, good.
So let's take some time to zoom in on your work. Kyle, can you paint a picture of your school in Hong Kong? What makes it unique?
Yeah, good question. So we're developing a brand new program. It's Montessori, and it's a Montessori middle school. Most people are familiar with Montessori as being a really innovative early years elementary type of program where the key tenets are mixed age level. Also, in terms of the learning pedagogy, that is very child centered. When the kids are ready for a particular lesson, that's when they come to the teacher for it. When the kids want to extend work and do projects related to what that lesson is, it's their choice in terms of how they extend that. And they have the mixed age levels, so the older kids are teaching the younger kids. The question became, well, what does that look like in secondary? Montessori wrote a little bit about the adolescent program, and her philosophy, at least at that time, because it was a time of war, was that kids would go out to the countryside and live on a farm, live and manage a farm, and that there would be businesses that come out of the farm. That was the initial philosophy. We're in Hong Kong. We don't have a lot of land. That's not exactly possible. So what does the urban version of that look like? And the urban version looks like a student's running, managing, designing, and implementing their own business. Sometimes it's a sandwich shop. Sometimes it's a cafe. Sometimes it's a chicken coop. Sometimes it's arts and crafts business. And that would teach them more about adult life than anything else. So that's one of the core tenets. And so we have started to build around that. And then also subjects merged together in large themes. So in the elementary, it was great stories. Stories would unify all the different subjects together, and that's how kids would learn about science, math, and language and all these things. And in our program, it's around these larger themes and big questions that drive them. We do 4 of those large themes a year, and that merges science and humanities. And I won't talk too much about the math and language programs, but we have those kind of also on the side to help supplement.
Wow. That just sounds like such a engaging and student-centered environment to be able to grow up in those years when I remember as a teenager, that's all I wanted to do was to be heard and to be seen and to have a voice. And if I was given a program like that where I could create my own business, I wonder where I would be now. Maybe I would be here sooner. Maybe I'd be in a completely different space. So
Yeah.
I'm curious then what led you to design this school and how has working internationally influenced the way that you see education now?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I got my first exposure to this type of learning back in San Diego. I don't know if you're familiar with High Tech High, but yeah, High Tech High was one of the premier schools trying to lead this charge to more real project-based experiences where students are actually working in partnership with industry, with business, with nonprofits, with local parks, and the projects would kind of come out of those things, and curriculum was taught through that. So I was already in San Diego, doing my first few years of teaching. And I think as like many teachers, you get one of those pink slips, right? If you're lowest on the totem pole, if they need to do budget cuts. So they had to do budget cuts. So I had to look for greener pastures. And that's when I stumbled into High Tech High. I heard about it. They say, you got to check the school out. It perfectly matches your ethos. And I walked in, it looked like a carnival. It looked like a camp. And it wasn't summertime. It was first few weeks of school. Wasn't a teacher anywhere to be seen. And I was greeted by two kids, 13 years old, in these nice button-up shirts. And they said, hey, you must be Kyle. They called me by my first name. And I'm like, well, I usually go by Mr. Wagner, but you can call me Mr. Kyle, right? I mean, this is what I knew of teaching. I'm new, I'm fresh. I'm like, okay, they got to call me by my last name. That's what you first learn in teacher school. And then you establish authority, early on. But all those rules have been thrown out. And of course, that stuff's important. But they were showing me, they just went back, showed me some of the projects they were working on. They had these engineering, things hanging from the ceiling. They had shadow boxes of different art projects they were taking on. They had books that they had written to map the flora and fauna of the region. And it literally looked like, what you do at a camp, but in a school. And then, finally, when I went back and found the teachers, they were, kind of in the sidelines, supporting some kids and asking them some questions about what they're working on. But that totally shifted my mind in terms of what the teacher's role is, what the kids potentially can do when we give them this level of autonomy and, let them follow their interest and teach a curriculum through things that are real. And I think in the adolescence period, meaning and purpose is one of the most significant things for them. It's not elementary where they're just interested in almost everything under the sun. It's like where they really need to have something meaningful. And they say, kids are the biggest, I won't say the word because probably this is, probably a clean version, but bull beep detectors. And they can detect and see right through it. And the more authentic that we can be as educators, the more we can get along right beside them and learning, which projects tend to do, the more impactful we can be. So that's kind of how I got started in this.
Yeah, it sounds also like there is an overwhelming amount of humanity that goes on from the very first second, rather than what you typically see as kind of like this invisible divide that we have when we, have like this role of the teacher or the sage on the stage, rather than coming alongside it, really changes that student ownership, I would think, as well, too.
Yeah. Yeah. They say, two things to mention there. When people come into High Tech High, they ask the founder, they say, look, I've heard you're one of the most premier project-based schools, so we want to see it. And they said, well, we'd like to be known not as a project-based school, but a dialogue school.
Hmm.
And, a dialogue and discourse school, which means, learning is constantly negotiated and it's a constant dialogue back and forth. And it's more that conversation. It's more important in those deeper kind of understandings that come about, less so, than the project itself. And learning, as you mentioned as well, is something that every learner actually carries with them, curriculum. And they say, if we actually viewed students as curriculum, that's another thing that they taught me at High Tech High, is like students' stories as part of the curriculum and
Hmm.
experience as curriculum. Because they come in with all of their unique experiences, but so often, we don't include those experiences being part of our curriculum, regardless of what subject we're teaching. And you might be looking at a community and mapping different communities and history of those communities. Some of their families might have been there for several generations and might not more know about that city than any textbook would. And if we start viewing learning, I think, in more of this discourse, we really start to erase all of those kind of negative behaviors that we see. Not to say it doesn't happen, because kids need reminders time to time, but they would bang on the doors at lunch. They bang on the doors to get back in to the building. I don't know any other schools where they don't want an extended lunch because they want to get back to learning.
I definitely have not met one myself where the kids are banging to back. There was I should say there was one teacher where I remember he was very amazing, but then again, it was like about him and what he brought to the room. And so the kids would literally bang on the window for him, but then if he wasn't there, they're not banging to get back in for the necessarily the learning. They're getting, I want to see you, because as soon as he was not
Yeah.
in the room anymore, that magic was kind of lost, right?
Just to touch on that, this idea that's so important that you mentioned that, because I think we need to get away from, as schools, there's one or two just stellar teachers, right, that kids can't wait to see,
Yep.
because then it becomes about one or two of them and not an ethos or culture that the school instills that can easily be, regardless of what teacher comes in. This idea of collective efficacy has the biggest impact, right, on learning more than any individual could.
Yeah, I agree, and I could see that some of those issues that happen outside where the parents are talking, and maybe one thing is a teacher has done one thing in one class and another class is a different experience, and we know that the parents are comparing, and I think that it would help as well if the staff was unified in their approaches in project-based learning, because then it would also help the parents to see that, okay, we have a unified approach to the learning. And if I put my kid in this class or this class, they're going to have those same experiences, regardless of who is teaching the class.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, it should be slightly different, right? I mean, in terms of how those are delivered, right? You want the teacher to interject their own personality into things, but you do have a couple core, like we had 4 or 5 common principles that across the whole school. And then when High Tech High expanded, those same principles existed, like adult as designer, common intellectual mission, adult world connection. These were, some of the ethos that, regardless of what school you went to, these were the core principles in which, learning was designed around.
Oh, I can hear you talk and describe of when you walked in and you lit up as you were describing the first experience you had in one of these spaces. So you can imagine what the students are feeling as well. But I wonder, what are some of the challenges that you face when you shift away from traditional educational models?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of challenges because everyone remembers like something about their schooling experience, right? You don't, we've all, yes, been to the doctor, but have we been to the doctor 5, 6 hours a day for like, 8 or 9, 10 years of our life, or if you extended that on? So everybody has an experience of schooling that they remember, and what's hard, there's different stakeholders. I mean, we're dealing with in Asia right now, the parents have a memory of what school was. And to shift away from that is very difficult because unless you've seen it in action, like I said, when I saw High Tech High, you just can't even fathom or imagine it. So that's hard to shift into that. I mean, you have the parent stakeholders who need to kind of somewhat divorce themselves of what their experience of school, was, because that might have been Rose, the teacher standing in front of the classroom. You all have a set assignment. You then take an exam to show you understand whatever that particular principle was. Worksheets were passed out and things, and then you got a grade for it. To have it more centered on these big questions and projects, parents get scared. Well, how can we guarantee the type of learning that we know is important? Like that's why we had kids sitting in rows. And so it's hard to communicate with them and shift that mindset to show actually you're still teaching the curriculum, you're just not organizing it in the same way. So that's difficult. The other stakeholder is the kids themselves. When I was at High Tech High, we sat in a circle because we believed in democratic classrooms. We sit in a circle at the beginning of each week, and we'd ask kids what changes they wanted to see. And this is a very kind of liberal, student-centered school, and I thought they were going to want to have some more ownership or choose their own projects. They wanted literally like a packet that says everything that they have that week that
Yep.
was due. They wanted that particular structure. And we try to honor that because yes, it is child-centered, student-centered. Sometimes you say, okay, yes, we want that. We'll do our best to give that to you. But this level of uncertainty and this level of flexibility, when you get out into the real world, it's not going to be that certain. It's not going to be like, here is everything you need to do for 5 days, and here's the worksheet, and here's the tick box list. So that's another stakeholder is the students themselves. It takes a while for them to become accustomed to their kind of negotiating. We're negotiating learning together. So we do have ways to negotiate that because you do have a central question. You do have a central kind of concept. You do have checkpoints and certain things that kids are going to do. And you do map the curriculum as teachers as well. So you do give them a bit of that certainty, but it is definitely more uncertain. And I think
Mhm.
then The challenges for teachers themselves, I mean, they're endless because we have a high stakes assessment driven culture, regardless of where you're at. We especially see it over here in Asia. And that is a barometer for learning. And
Hmm.
we know as teachers that there's so many more ways to assess students, and it's just such only one measure, and probably not even the best measure of learning. But that's what everybody attests to when you talk about how well a school is doing or how many kids got into the Ivy League schools. And we just need to broaden our horizons. And I think, to be honest, a lot of teachers are there. Admin has to get on board
Hmm.
because, look, you're starting this podcast. I don't hear any podcast, or I have never been to a conference that says, let's learn how to do testing better.
Hmm.
That's never a
Hmm.
topic at a
Yeah.
conference. It's like, how do we make things more, engaging, interesting? How do we integrate AI and AI tools, STEM and this kind of hands-on based experiences or inquiry? How do we unpack, kids' questions? This is teachers, I feel like, are really on board, but you have tests, you don't have the schedule. You're talking earlier about how important it is to collaborate with other educators. Quite frankly, that's usually left for an hour, 45 minutes a week, just not enough time to really build
Hmm.
great learning experiences. But then admin keeps throwing these things on them like, try this new innovation, try this, but they haven't really charted a path to actually make that happen. So
Yeah.
really, there's challenges.
Yeah. I wonder what layers might be easiest to go first to make room for exploring project-based learning.
Yeah. I think that what I tell people is take your very first unit, whatever you have to teach. I was a humanities or history guy. That might be ancient Egypt or Greece or colonization or migration, whatever it is. And, instead of, because most teachers aren't necessarily teaching from the textbook, but they do kind of scaffold it out with like, here are the different lessons that we're going
Right.
to get is, start with envisioning. They say this is like UBD, understanding by design. Project-based learning is slightly different when you get really like into it because you don't necessarily want to revolve everything around just one set product at the end, but this is helpful for teachers, and you look at, okay, how is that relevant to students, first of all, that particular topic? And how can we change that end of unit, whatever we did, to be just much more active? So, if that was an exam or was a report, how can we shift that? So one of the first things we did, let's just say I was teaching archaeology, and I had to teach about how archaeologists, make conclusions, how they date different artifacts and so forth. One of the first projects, I was like, look, I don't know how to do this. Can someone help me? And someone's like, oh, I got a great one. And it was the kids putting together museums of other people, actually, classmates, and they were digging up their artifacts. We had this big dig and stuff, and they put in Ziploc bags to make sure they'd stay, protected or safe. They had to make conclusions of who they thought it was in the class based on their, and then that was really connected to, well, this is, how archaeologists make conclusions as well. They had to see which layer it was so they could determine, in terms of years of their life. But this suddenly became just a much more interesting way to learn about archaeology. Now suddenly they're interested in the curriculum because it's related to them, and they're doing something that real like archaeologists would do. So I say, look at your particular unit. What's the end product? In this case, it was a miniature museum where they exhibit all their museums of their classmates. And then in the real world, what do scientists, archaeologists, mathematicians, or whatever do around this particular work? Get them as much as possible doing that kind of work to get to that end goal. And then at the beginning, the very first thing, you don't start with, we're going to do an archaeological dig or we're going to learn about classmates. You start with a big, question. And what question is driving it? You know, and that might be what makes us us, could be the big question. Set them in the role. How as archaeologists can we learn more about our classmates through a dig, or so that it's, the question which drives things. There's a clear gap in the learning to get to that end stage, and then what kids are doing along the way is, the real work. And
So
that particular one, we didn't have to involve anyone outside of that.
I'm just curious at a couple of things. One, do you as the teacher then have that idea of we're going to do a mini museum at the end? Or is that something that you collaboratively decide on with the kids? what the project's going to look like? Or is that something you kind of teach throughout the year?
Well, it depends. I always tell people it's structured, guided, open. What's your comfort level as a teacher with this uncertainty? If you are very uncomfortable with it, you've never done a project before, it's better to bring something out of the gates where you can feel successful on, because it could, as I say, I don't want to say horribly awry, but it could definitely, not go the way that you're comfortable with. And then a lot of people, trust me, they say this, it's a failure, project-based learning doesn't work, never going back. So I always tell people, start with more structured. Okay, here's the end. Like literally, our kids were putting together shoeboxes, museums. 90% of them were happy. 10% said, I don't want to do a shoebox, Mr. Kyle. Can I do something else? And of course, I was young in my days. I was like, nope, we're all doing shoeboxes. Like, the wiser me probably would have said, yeah, do whatever you want. But that's a level of comfort that you only get after doing it a few times. So I would say start with the structure. You can maybe kind of organize at the end. Hey, we're putting together this museum. How you put together this museum is completely up to you. But that's kind of where we're going.
Love it.
And so, yeah. And then now it started to open up. So when we did it in successive years, it was like however they wanted to put it together. And, the process they went through. They did living museums. In future years, we did one of Egypt. Then I said, whatever culture you guys want to do, let's do that. And we can look at other cultures do that. So they picked which civilization they want to do. So then I got way more comfortable with it. And now it was like, it became really open where it's like, here's the big question. Let's just start exploring it. You guys are coming up with, how we're going to go about answering this question and displaying it.
Do you think that might mimic the experience that your students have when they come to your high school as well? That, some of them at first might feel that, okay, I'm not sure about this, but then as they go through and they try it more and more, they become more confident risk takers in the projects and the assignments that they approach.
Yeah. Yeah. And a lot of it depends on the kid too, to be honest. I mean, it depends on the system they came from, but it
Mhm.
also depends on the kid, because some kids are just ready for it right away and they actually do just as well, if not better, than the ones who have been exposed to it for a while. I was having a conversation with a parent, two kids, same family. One kid loves worksheets, one kid despises them.
Yes.
So it's really, we gotta personalize it. That's a big thing. For the way that particular kid, likes to learn. We had a kid just come into our program, doesn't speak a lot of English, but he loves sports. And the minute you start talking about sports, he wants to speak English because he wants to communicate things about basketball or football. And now he's formed this nice group of friends with some of our current kids, and his English is just accelerated. And then he also loves business, and his parents have a business. They've been really big on like social media and marketing. They're like influencers. Well, he knows about this. So when it comes to our business brainstorm, it's like he'll chirp up. So it's tapped into interest. Yeah, a lot of it has to do with the kid themselves. That's why I say personalization. I think that is the biggest X factor. Project-based learning is great, but if you have 50 kids and one teacher, even in a most engaging way, it's like not like you can really personalize the way you have if it's 10 kids or 12 kids for one teacher.
Yeah, that's a good point. So if you could then wave a magic wand and change one educational practice in the whole wide world, what would you re-examine or rethink first?
I think it would have to be assessment, because I think that's what drives so much of the way we are organizing learning. And it's nice when I come in, I give a workshop, about project-based learning and other things, but I always hear the objection, and I see it in people's faces right when I start with it. The objection is, great, I believe in that. Here's though the way I need to assess kids, you know. So
Yeah.
if we could change that, and it's not easy, like, because we have different ways. I don't know. You go in the real world, yes, there's evaluations, there's assessments, right? They do tick boxes. But a lot of that is just feedback and conversations in terms
Hmm.
of learning, right? Regardless of what workplace you're in. There's a mentor, someone who helps show you the ropes, and then they give you
Hmm.
feedback about like how you're doing, related to what you're doing. You don't get an A, a B, a C, or a D. But then in
No.
schools, that's how we measure learning at the end. It's like literally all this input. for this simple output. And like how, how supportive is that of students moving forward? So I think we need to change that. And I think especially with AI now, literally the kids are just gonna, it doesn't matter how many times you tell them to, you're blue in the face. If you give them a prompt, who wouldn't go home, type that particular prompt in, say, make it sound like me. I'm an 11-year-old kid, I'm a 10-year-old kid. Like we're doing with this even in our program. So that's on us. Like we need to change this assessment model. So I
Yeah.
think AI should actually accelerate that, but we know how, educators hold on to this system the same way they hold on to like the wooden desks that are bolted to their ground. But I've given the same assignment and I have all my materials that have been created for this. And it's like, well, we've got to shift that because now it's got to be a growth journey that you are able to measure. And we have to say, you know what, kids, it's important you do well and we want you to do well. But that carrot hanging at the end is not what you're working towards. It's like this learning
Absolutely.
process. So,
Have you seen any of those AI glasses yet come into your school? Has anybody worn them yet?
well, I don't know. I mean, they have watches now, right? We had a cell phone policy. We're like, nope, no cell phones. Kids got a watch. We're like, hey, I think that's doing the same thing a cell phone is. But no, what are the AI glasses? Like, does it literally just take input and then give you a particular output?
Yeah, so same idea, but you can also be recording as people are talking or as you're walking through a building. You can even get them covered out here with a prescription. You can get them, just paid for right with your regular glasses now. So it's not, too expensive to even to wear these glasses. They look very similar actually to yours, the ones that you're wearing right now. So it would be virtually undetectable for an educator to know that a student is literally taking what the teacher is saying and having it fed back to them in real time.
Oh, okay. Fed back to them in terms of translating it or like, I don't know,
Could
simplifying
be.
it?
Could be
Okay.
whatever that particular student needs. So it could be translation, which might be helpful, but it could also be, directly feeding them the answer. Say if it's just an easy multiple choice question, something like that. Yeah.
Interesting. I
Yeah.
say, actually, going back to your first question, given what you just shared with me, brings up another thing that I know you said one, but I think this is a big change is teacher talk, student talk. Like that's a easy indicator. How active is your classroom? Who's doing most of the talking? Because even what you're sharing there is like, okay, I'm taking it in. I'm listening to the teacher. I got my glasses up. The teacher should be like on for 10 minutes just to set the context for learning, to establish a bit of a gap or inquiry and help and support students and fill in whatever that gap is, regardless of what the subject is. But that's about it. Everything else should be about active exploration.
Yeah, I think we know that our attention spans are not that long and they have been impaired. And so I think the faster we can get through the talking and get the kids doing, the more time their brain spends in the active zone and less in a passive state.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Active versus passive. I mean, my statement is, at least in terms of the business that I do, I say equipping the international educators to move from passive to active learning spaces through 12 shifts. So that whole concept of active, right? If we can go for more an active space.
Love it. Everybody comes home with a red face. So we're going to move to one of my favorite parts of the show, which is myth busting. There are so many assumptions about education, I think, that hold many schools back. And I'd love for you to help us challenge a few of the big ones. I'll share a myth and you can tell us why it's not true and what educators should focus on instead.
Sure.
You want to try?
Yeah.
All right, myth number one. Standardized testing is the best way to measure student success.
Yeah. Well, it's clearly a myth. False. It's one point in time. Usually it's quite knowledge based. You can set up novel situations where you ask more open-ended questions. So I suppose, to be fair, I'd have to know more about the standardized test in terms of how the test is set up. Is it like asking bigger open-ended questions where the kids are having to do a lot of active thinking in terms of how they answer that, or is it just multiple choice, or fill in the blank? So it's one measurement. I think it's part of the overall equation of assessment, but The better way, I would say, is this mapping growth over time in terms of learning. And that sometimes can be done through digital portfolios. Sometimes that can be done through observations and reflections and conversations. But that's a much better way to track learning.
Love it. Myth number 2, project-based learning is too chaotic and unstructured to be effective.
Yeah, I have this as one of my myths too. Yeah, it could be. Let's just say it could be, right? But it's a myth because it depends on what you view as chaos. Like everybody has a different threshold, right? Kids going, like not running around, but kids up and about and standing up and moving around consistently through the actual period. For some people, that is chaos, right? So that's more of a mindset shift of ourselves that we have to become comfortable with.
Yeah.
So I think it's a myth because it has to do with the comfortability of the educator. I think it's going to feel that way for a lot of people when they first started because it's so different
Hmm.
from the way they've set up their classrooms. So here's a way to just make some small changes. Get rid of the teacher's desk at the front. Just try
Love
that.
it.
That was a big, big thing that helped me. And I just put it in the corner where you couldn't really see it. That helped me naturally shift to be more comfortable. Taught at different points of the rooms. So I'd say, yeah, little stepping stones. You don't start right away with this huge open-ended project, as we mentioned earlier. Have something a bit more structured and move your teacher's desk from the front of the classroom, and you'll see a lot of interesting things happen.
I love it. And I'm a big believer myself. One of my favorite projects ever was I work with the Wonder robots. I don't know if you've seen them, but they're really fun for younger kids to work with and program. And we had been discussing clothing. And so they each got a robot and they had various materials to choose from, and they had to design robot outfits. And to celebrate, we did a robot fashion show in which they designed the whole runway. And it is one of these memories that the kids come back to again and again. And I think it was one of the last days of school where most kids are kind of losing it. But the
Uh,
buzz in the class on one of the last days of summer, it was easy. I could step back in the doorway and actually watch the kids engage, communicate, create the entire day without, sure, there were, I want this and I want that. And they had to negotiate what they were doing with their group to make their robot costume. But, they weren't fighting or bickering or, getting themselves into trouble. It was just a joy-filled day, I think, to wrap up our year together.
wow, yeah. And what's your hunch as to why that was so successful?
Well, I think that it was student driven. They were super excited. They had a little bit of confines, like we're making some kind of outfit for your robot, but it could be a hat, which we got. One of my favorites was a student who actually came to us from Hong Kong, but she was very shy to speak in the beginning. She is off and away and speaking now, but then she didn't speak very much. And she actually designed a wedding dress for her robot. And that day, you could just see in her face the joy and pride that she was able to create something that was not contingent upon language to connect with the people in the class with her. So I think all of those things just made it a wonderful experience.
Yeah, and probably an experience that when they think back to schooling, what do you remember? We always do this with parents as well. What's an experience you remember, right? They're not going to remember the test or some really exciting lecture that you gave. It's these kind of projects.
Right, and it's not too hard. I mean, once you have the robots, you just go into that room and pull out any scraps you can get and glue and
Yeah,
Q-tips and you're off and away, or the kids can bring in stuff if they want to as well.
yeah, yeah, fun.
So, Kyle, this has been a very rich conversation with lots of great information. But before I wrap up, I want to ask you one final question. If you could leave educators with one powerful lens to look through as they walk back into their classrooms tomorrow for us, what would it be?
Yeah, gosh, there's a lot of different lenses. Maybe this is the time to plug my book.
Yes.
I don't
Wow.
know if
Where is the
you
teacher?
do a video. Yeah, where's the teacher? The 12 shifts for student-centered environments. So it depends on what lens, what lens they want to look at it. And I always say, just like students, right? We want to give our educators choice. And oftentimes it's an overwhelm of choice, right? You go down the cereal aisle in a big supermarket in the West, and you have literally 100 different cereal choices, and you're in crisis. You're like, I don't even know which one to choose. So like, I'm not going to get cereal. Same thing with this, in terms of education. There's so much noise around so many things you could be doing, and it's very hard to pick a focus point. So the whole reason I wrote this is to give educators a focal point, a shift that they want to make in their classroom. So one is, I'm not going to actually go in with content. I'm going to go in with questions. And actually, I'm going to start with big questions. So, for example, in science, in scientific method, we're going to learn the scientific method. It's, it's a bigger question of like how scientists reach, conclusions. That might be a shift that they're going to make. Another shift they might want to make has to do with, hey, there's that teacher next door. I get tail ends chats of this. I know they're talking about coordinates and planes and stuff, and we're doing latitude and longitude over here, and it's very similar. Maybe actually we want to just coordinate on something together. It could be a lesson or two. So that's a shift from isolated experiences to interdisciplinary, connected experience. Others might say, hey, I want to make my class more collaborative. The kids are sitting in rows. Okay, how can we have more collaborative structures? And you don't have to have a huge project, but you could just put the rows into little table groups. And now all of a sudden, now you have a lot more collaboration, right? You have some different roles. Someone could be the spokesperson, or the note taker. And during discussions, they have those discussions and whatnot, and they're sharing back with the rest of the classroom. So that's a shift from a siloed to, more collaborative. Another shift is assessment. Do I typically have one form of assessment? Well, I'm going to make it more varied, or I'm going to actually give kids ownership of their assessments, and they are actually going to be sharing evidence of what they've done. So it's more reflective, it's more self-evaluated. That's going from a teacher assessed to a self-assessed and peers, peer assessed. That could be the shift you're trying to make, because if you do one of these things, it will really shift the dynamic in your classroom, as I'm convinced of that. And actually, by doing one of these things, you start to make all these other shifts just naturally, but you're really focusing on one. That's why the whole reason I wrote this is to look at a lens of what shift can I make, what feels doable in my particular context.
I think that book is going to help a lot of people to see how they can start to do this, because what I notice is sometimes people tell you to do things, but they don't necessarily give you the ingredients of how to go about it. And so it feels like this huge mountain in front of you. But I love that your book creates the pathway of shifts so that educators can start with one focused and see how far they can get down their journey. Where else can educators see you or reach you other than reading your book?
Well, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. That's like the main place that I am posting different ideas. So you can find out. I usually have provocations, questions related to the development of our school right now, because I try to be building in public, right? We're building this whole new program. So I always try to just be transparent, even not just the great things, the challenges as well. So LinkedIn is a good place to just connect with me. You can look me up on there, Kyle Wagner. And then also just feel free to message me. I have a podcast as well. So my podcast is called The Student Centered Shift. So that's another way to hear more from me. And if you want to send me an email because you want to answer right away around something, it's kylewagner@transformschool.com.
Thank you so much for joining me today. And as you mentioned, all the beautiful ways that you can connect with Kyle. Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. This was Behind the Educator's Lens, where we uncovered the perspectives shaping the future of education. Until next time, keep looking deeper.